Hey folks, welcome. Please just give us just another moment or two. In the meanwhile, you're invited to share this stream with your networks if you're able to, and if you'd like to. Trying to build our audience just for a moment. Okay, I think I'm just about ready. Okay, Stacey, you almost ready?
I'm ready.
Awesome. Kate, you ready?
Yes.
Very good. Good evening, everybody. Thank you all so much for tuning in. My name is Adam Shimoni. I serve as a council member here in Flagstaff, and I have the honor and privilege of hosting this really important conversation that we're going to have with you all, with Kate Wyatt here with FIAT and Stacey with the Arizona Trust. And the Trust stands for Training and Resources United to Stop Trafficking at the state level. And we're going to be talking about trafficking, and it's a really important conversation that we're excited to have with you all. So again, thank you all so much for tuning in, and please do take a moment to share this live stream with your networks on your pages to help build our audience. But before we do jump into things, I just wanted to make clear and state that the opinions and ideas shared by myself are of my own and do not reflect or are not on behalf of the council or the city. So just need to disclose that with all of you and just make it clear that what I share is on behalf of myself and not representing the council or the city of Flagstaff. That being said, let's jump right into it. I love to kind of get started with just some introductions. Kate, maybe I'll pass it to you first and have you talk a little about who you are, the work you're doing, the work that FIAT does, and then also weave in what it is that got you passionate and involved in this work. You know, this isn't just work that you sign up to do out of the blue. You know, I'm sure we all have our own stories as to why this is meaningful to us, but I'd love to take a moment to give you that opportunity to share that with the public and let people know what drives your passion. So Kate, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. So yes, I'm Kate Wyatt. I'm the Director of Human Trafficking Services with Northland Family Help Center, and I started the Flagstaff Initiative Against Trafficking in 2017. And that kind of ties together why Stacey's here as well. So Trust was very instrumental to helping us build FIAT. They have been a wonderful ally and a great source of information for us for a very long time, going on 5 years now. So very grateful to have Stacey joining us for this conversation as well. But the Flagstaff Initiative Against Trafficking, for those of you that don't know, when we started back in 2017, we came up with 3 goals, and those were to educate the community on human trafficking, and we do that through providing a ton of education and training to our community. So I'm pretty much constantly doing trainings for different service providers, medical personnel, law enforcement, school staff. We've created some educational videos, just getting as much information out there as we can. We also wanted to determine what the impact of trafficking is in our community. And so we do that in a couple of ways. We've mostly focused up to this point on working with victims in our community. And so since we started gathering data in 2017, our community has had contact with over 600 individuals who've experienced human trafficking. Wow. And that is including both sex and labor trafficking or both. And we have worked with people from a variety of different ages. And then last, we wanted to create a coordinated community response. And so we do that through flowcharts and continuing conversations with our communities and our community members. So understanding where gaps in services are, where victims are identifying that they need more support, and also to just be a unified community. So knowing who we can call when we have a survivor in our community and know who provides what services that we need. And the way I got into this work is through working at Northland. And so I've been with Northland Family Help Center since 2012. I started as an intern there. And I worked in our various different programs, mostly our shelters. And so I started in our domestic violence shelter and eventually transitioned over to the youth shelter. And through working with survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, as well as youth who are working with our juvenile probation system or working with DCS or who are experiencing homelessness, we heard a lot of stories from them about exploitation and didn't really have a way of knowing what they were experiencing. There was no name that we had for it until I started to connect with some providers and survivors in the Valley and people like Stacey to understand that what they're experiencing is human trafficking and that they're being exploited, and that, you know, this is something we need to address in our community because it's happening here. It's happening every day. It's not something that we all see every day, right? And so that's why we didn't really have a name for it, is because we often don't see it. And so we needed to understand where it was happening, what questions we could ask, and how to best serve these individuals moving forward to be able to continue with their life and not just be a victim of exploitation. And so that's how I got into this work and have just continued, and am excited to be continuing this work and having this conversation with our community. So thank you.
Thank you, Kate. And you know, I'm going to ask you one follow-up. You know, talk a little bit about why is this important to you? And if you mentioned it, I apologize, I might have missed it, but why? What about this work? What drives you?
Yeah, I just really have come to know and realize how much exploitation is just degrading of the human, and how it commodifies humans for both sex and labor trafficking. And as a social worker, I really value humans and their independence, and that they should be receiving the care and supports and have access to a life where they're not being forced or coerced to do anything that they don't want to be doing. And so just really passionate about providing opportunities for individuals and families and people in our community to experience a life where they don't experience exploitation. And I'm also very passionate about being connected to the community that I live in. I very much love and appreciate Flagstaff, and I want it to be a community where people can come and experience the amazing life that it has to offer, right? We have the mountains, we have wonderful trails. We are a very well-connected community where we do all join together and just, like I said, have a real sense of community. And so I love having that connection and have felt a lot of support over the last several years with how open people have been to these conversations and trainings. And so, you know, not only for the victims and survivors in our community, but also just the individuals and the agencies in our community that are open to also providing services to others.
That's great. Thank you for sharing, Kate. And Christy, who's tuning in, says, I had no idea it was such an issue in Flagstaff. Thank you for being here to educate us. Yeah, Christy, we have a situation for sure. And we'll dive more into that situation in a brief moment here. But thank you for tuning in. And again, Kate, thank you for sharing in your introduction. Stacey, you've been doing this work for a long time, and I'm just learning as of today that you were involved in setting up our local chapter, our local FIAT efforts. So, wow, we have a lot to thank you for. But please take a moment to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about trust, and talk a little bit about what it is that drives you in this work. Why is this important to you?
Absolutely. So my name is Stacey Sutherland. I'm the Director of Trust Training and Resources United to Stop Trafficking. I am a program of the Arizona Anti-Trafficking Network. We're a very small but mighty nonprofit, and we have 5 different programs, all different lanes of human trafficking, and I'm really proud of the work that we do through my program and my sister programs. I used to work in EMS. I was a first responder. I can tell you I responded to victims of human trafficking. I did not have the training or knowledge back then when I was working EMS. I definitely missed opportunities to identify and help victims, right? And so having babies and working 24-hour shifts is not very conducive. And so I got into children's justice, and we had the opportunity to apply for a human trafficking grant. And I applied for the position, and I had never heard of it before. And so I was like, oh, wow, there's this whole victimization out there, and this whole commercial aspects of force, fraud, and coercion. And it was very, very interesting to me. And given the vast amounts of people throughout the United States and the world that experience forced labor or forced commercial sex, was really mind-blowing. And so I dove in on a federal grant, and that's how I kind of began my career. And so now we work all over the state. We do lots of training. We have lots of resources. We really believe in making the training free and accessible to anybody, whether that's just your average citizen who wants human trafficking training, all the way up to advanced training for law enforcement. So we do everything in between that. And again, we bring lots of resources with us, like guides, all kinds of things for parents or specific disciplines or work groups. And we just make it accessible for everybody because we want everyone to have this knowledge. We want people to be able to respond and report and recognize human trafficking.
That's great. And Stacey, what you might have mentioned it, but again, why is this so important to you?
You know, I really think it's important to me because it's a very complicated issue. A lot of times I think in life we want to make something black or white. And there's literally 100,000 shades of gray. There's a lot of nuances to this. But what it really comes down to is vulnerability, or somebody is being forced or coerced into this. And so sometimes it's really hard to see those elements of force, fraud, and coercion. And then it just comes down to vulnerability. And we're talking about some of the most oppressed or vulnerable people in our society. And I believe that we should be taking care of those and not allowing people to victimize them.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. And thank you for your work. So I'm assuming there's a bit of collaboration between FIAT and Trust. Kate and Stacey, can either of you speak to that kind of what collaboration exists?
Yeah. So like Kate mentioned, started coming up in 2017 when they were like, hey, we're going to start FIAT. I was like, I love it. And you know, I'm based down in the valley, so I'm like, yes, may I come up in July? You know, we love to come up to Flagstaff when it's cooler, but you know, I think there's kind of a misnomer about trafficking that it really only happens in large cities. And it would be really ignorant of us to say like, hey, it doesn't happen here. There's lots of different venues for trafficking. There's lots of different modes of trafficking and different types of traffickers. And so for someone to go, oh, this is a small town, or this is a really happy town, or a progressive town, or whatever adjective they want to put on it, it doesn't mean that it can't happen there. And I believe it happens almost in every city, town, everywhere, urban, rural, suburban, it doesn't matter. You can have forms of trafficking in your community.
Absolutely. Kate, anything to add?
Yeah, I'll just add, Stacey is always my go-to person. And so kind of going down the line of addressing demand, you know, this is something that we've wanted to focus on and something I've wanted to focus on in our community for a long time. And so like I talked about, right, we have been very survivor and victim focused in our efforts over the last 5 years. But we really know we can't end trafficking in our community without addressing demand. And so, you know, I called Stacey immediately and was like, Stacey, we need to address this in our community. What resources do you have? And so just providing us with resources like reports and things that have been happening across our state and across our nation that address demand and learn why buyers participate in paying for sex, and what motivates them to no longer pay for sex, as well as implementing ordinances in cities and states to drive down demand and to hold buyers accountable, and also to support law enforcement so that their efforts are easier when addressing these crimes in our community. And then also, right, so that victim-centered response. We don't want to provide negative legal outcomes to victims in our community that are going to have long-lasting effects on them, right? We hear from survivors that they still have felony charges, and they can't volunteer at their kids' school because of these charges. They can't get jobs. They can't get housing. And this all goes back to their victimization when they were being forced to participate in these acts, not something that they willingly chose, but they're still dealing with that. And so we don't want that to happen in our community. And so Stacey has just provided a lot of really helpful information and guidance for how we can move forward in our community. And that involves these ordinances, and that involves training for the city and for the county to really implement those ordinances and those projects.
That's great. Thank you. And to piggyback on that, Kate, maybe that we'll transition from that point and talk a little bit about the situational update that we're going to provide for the community, both here in the city of Flagstaff and then statewide. So maybe we'll start with the city. I know you were touching upon that demand. Maybe dive into that more for folks who aren't familiar, who don't think trafficking is a thing here in Northern Arizona, in our beautiful mountain town, where we feel like we know everybody. What are you seeing on the ground? What are you seeing in the community? Just give us a general update on trafficking here in Flagstaff and in Northern Arizona.
Yeah. And so, like I mentioned, since 2017, we've had contact with over 600 victims in our community. And some of those folks were engaged in the life or were being exploited previously. And now they're no longer being exploited, but it was something that they identified that they experienced. And some of them are coming out of that exploitation right at that moment. And so we know through our work with those survivors and victims that it takes about 7 to 10 times to leave. And that's very similar to domestic violence, right? So that's kind of my background is being familiar with the domestic violence movement. And knowing that there's a lot of things that keep people in this life. And so that can be physical violence, emotional violence, force, coercion, all of that, right? There's promises of wealth and fame. They'll be given things like money, drugs, alcohol, phones, anything that's like fitting their basic needs. To keep them in that life. And there's a lot of what we call trauma bonds that are formed between victims and traffickers that, again, keep them in that life. And so we have grown to understand what that side of things looks like. And now, right, like I've talked about, it's time to address the demand. And so in 2018, our local law enforcement did 2 sting operations. And we also partnered with the Arizona Anti-Trafficking Network at that time to post some fake ads. And so it was really interesting how those operations worked out with posting the ad. And so I'd worked with Stacey to post that. She put an ad up and it was going to be out for 2 weeks. And little did we know, law enforcement was doing a sting operation on the Friday of that first ad posting. And that was a buyer operation. So they were also posting ads advertising sex with a minor. I want to be very clear that there are never minors actually involved in this. We don't exploit anybody. And so we had about 450 contacts with the ad that Stacey had posted during that first week. And so those are people from our community, our state, reaching out to somebody who's underage, attempting to set up a date with them to have sex. And on that Friday, law enforcement did a similar operation. It was just one day. And that day they arrested 8 men in our community who actually showed up to a hotel expecting to have sex with somebody under the age of 18. And so that was posted in our newspapers, got a lot of traction and attention, and really brought to light for our community that there is a demand. They did one later in that year as well. That was in December, and they were advertising sex with an adult and a minor during that one. Two men showed up expecting to have sex with the minor and received felony charges. Two men showed up expecting to have sex with the adult and had misdemeanor charges. But again, we had a lot of phone calls and a lot of activity that was happening during those. And I will say for the first operation, the week after, when our ad was still up, the numbers dropped significantly. We still had about 150 folks reaching out, but that's a drastic change from the 450 from the week before. And so we do know that there's a demand in our community. Stacey can also speak to some of the things she's looked up in the last week for us, looking at different websites and things. And again, we won't mention the names of the websites. There's a lot of very explicit material on them, but kind of these John websites where you can see people who have posted comments and who are advertising sex. And these wouldn't be active if there wasn't a market for it in our community. And so until we don't have a market for it, we can't get rid of exploitation. And so I'll pass it on to you, Stacey, if you want to speak more to that point.
And really quick before Stacey jumps in, Kate, Heather writes, would really like to know who the men in our community are that reply to those ads. And I just wanted to address that. Kate, that's, I'm guessing, not public information.
No, the operation that happened in March of 2018, you can look that ad up. It was March 13th of 2018, and it was a news story in the Arizona Daily Sun. So you can absolutely look that one up.
Very good. Stacey, take it away.
So just a little bit of information about Arizona. So we know that 1 in 20 men here in the state of Arizona buy sex. They are currently buying sex. They are a commercial sex buyer. Now, a lot of our buyers range in age from 18 years old to 84 years old. I've had everybody in between. Again, there's no cookie cutter, right? So every race, every socioeconomic status, every religion, right? I know sometimes we want to put it like in a cardboard box to figure out who it is, but it's very, very difficult to figure out who buyers are. A lot of buyers aren't going to, be hanging out with their friends and be like, okay, well, I'm going to leave the party because I'm going to go buy sex now, right? It's not really kind of something that people talk about. It's kind of and that's why this crime is so underground. I will tell you, I do run data collection. I do post ads from time to time, and we see kind of what's going on in certain areas of the state. When the stings were run previously in 2018, we had a website up called Backpage. And Backpage was actually brought down by our FBI task force for exploitation and human trafficking in the Valley. They were part of the team that brought that down. But that was really the centralized marketplace for online commercial sex. And after that was taken down, the marketplace really splintered. So I was on no less than 7 sites this week looking at Flagstaff, and all of the websites that I went to, definitely did have a demand on it. I think the lowest number on a given day I saw in Flagstaff on one of the sites was only 5 ad postings, right? But on another site, there were 50 plus ad postings a day, right? And so when you look at that and everything in between, you can really see how much demand that there is, right? And so it's really hard to say. Some people might be in Mojave County, but they have expanded all the way out to Flagstaff, like they're willing to travel to Flagstaff. Some of them are in Sedona area, right? And it's very, very easy to travel through Arizona. Our interstates make it really, really easy. And buyers don't just come from our community. I can tell you, we have done with law enforcement, they've done operations and they've had people drive, 100 miles plus to come and purchase a human being, whether that be an adult or a kid. And so we're always talking about that commercial aspect, right? And so I just want to remind people, it's not even just for money, right? When we say commercial sex, there's a commercial exchange. So if we take that vulnerable, homeless youth, right, that doesn't have a place to stay, and they're saying, hey, I'll exchange food and shelter if you have sex with me, right? They're a trafficking victim because now you're forcing them to trade for something for that sex act. So we really have to think of it as any item of value and just not a monetary exchange. And so a lot of our victims won't identify because they're like, well, I just had sex because so I had a safe place to stay that night, not realizing that someone took advantage of that vulnerability and they actually meet that threshold for a trafficking victim too. So again, that's where sometimes people don't see that as demand and people don't see that as a trafficking victim. I will say a lot of our ads, we don't share buyer data, but I do have ways of creating advertising and promoting not buying sex off of buyer data. And so it's kind of great to, remind people, hey, don't buy sex, or, it is a crime here in Arizona. You can be caught. We do take demand seriously here in Arizona. I love the talk of ordinances. I'd love to expand on that more if you guys are interested. Because I think we always need to be equitable. And I think in the past, a lot, like 10 plus years ago, the focus was really on the victim. And commonly they were referred to as, people being charged with prostitution. I don't use the word prostitute. I like commercial sex or a prostituted person, like someone's being forced into prostitution. And we really need to make it more equitable. So where the demand side is being punished instead of the victims, and the victims are being offered resources.
Very good. Thank you for that, Stacey. And Jeff, welcome. Thanks for tuning in. Jeff writes, will we be getting an update regarding the recent story involving our local police department trafficking investigation gone way wrong? Jeff, I know that this is a big topic for a lot of us in the community, and council's on break along with the city. The city has issued a statement, and we are actually not going to be touching that topic tonight, but we will be talking about all things around it. So I do hope you stay involved and stay tuned on this discussion, but we will not be diving into that specific operation. And I'm just going to leave it at that. But council will be getting back in session at the end of August, and I'm hopeful that we will have a discussion at some point at the dais with all of you, the public. And I invite you, as always, to email council your concerns, your thoughts, your comments, and engage with us that way. But I just wanted to address that, Jeff, for you. And so moving on to our next discussion point, which is best practices. Whether it's driving down demand or policies or anything relating to best practices. Kate, you want to start us off and speak a little bit to that?
Yeah. So kind of like what I talked about, right? Reaching out to Stacey about ordinances and things that we want to get into place. And so I'll touch on this briefly and let Stacey kind of elaborate, but we're looking to Mesa and Phoenix both for their city ordinances. Because they do definitely address these pieces of holding buyers accountable and having resources for victims of exploitation. And so just one piece, Mesa is kind of the first one I looked at, and they have an ordinance that provides law enforcement the opportunity to do inspections on massage parlors. And so it ensures that the folks that are working at the massage parlors have current licenses, that they're not expired, that there's no issues with those massage licenses. And then also ensures that law enforcement can walk in, do an inspection, make sure there aren't indicators of human trafficking there, which would include showers in the massage rooms, living quarters, things like hot plates, having locked doors or having locked entries. So just ensuring that everything that is happening there is, pretty similar to walking into like a massage envy, that would be held kind of to the same standard. And so that's the hope there. And then something we want to add to that as well is that, if there is something happening where it does seem like there's exploitation, that the folks that are working at the massage parlors have opportunities for support. So opportunities to get connected with social service providers like Northland Family Help Center, Victim Witness, our other agencies here in town, and yeah, an opportunity to get out of that life. And then, right, holding the buyers accountable. So recognizing when people are going to these massage businesses to ask for or are expecting an illicit massage. And then for Phoenix, they have done a wonderful job with holding buyers accountable. So they have a John school for when buyers get caught. They have a lot of wonderful ordinances that place harder restrictions on buyers. And so buyers aren't just getting a fine when they have contact with law enforcement. They're getting a fine, their car's impounded. I don't remember all of the nuances. I believe there might be some jail time. And they have to pay a fine that then goes to the recovery and the support for survivors in the community and anti-trafficking efforts. And so, again, looking to those sorts of ordinances that can, hold the buyer accountable, provide service and support for victims. And then I'll let Stacey speak more to what those look like and the things that she and I have talked about for changes we'd like to see.
So I sit on the City of Phoenix Mayor's Human Trafficking Task Force, and that's something as a task force that we worked on was the increased penalties for sex buyers. Buying sex with an adult, again, is by city ordinance, but it is a misdemeanor crime throughout the state. And in Phoenix, it is diversion eligible on a first-time offense. So on a second or third offense, you are not eligible for diversion. There is no jail time on that first-time offense, but your car is impounded for 30 days. You do pay a fine, and then you have the ability to go to diversion. Diversion does cost a lot of money, and so they will pay a hefty fee for that. And we have a lot of buyers that come through diversion, and it's an excellent class I teach at it. Law enforcement, we have psychologists and survivors and a doctor and other people. But we really wanted to, not just have like a citation, right? We wanted to increase the penalties. And so on second and third time offenses, we have the penalties maxed out as they can be for misdemeanor codes, which some of those, depending on how high they escalate, are jail time and expensive fines as expensive as they can get. The city of Mesa is currently working on a diversion ordinance, and so buyers will also start going to diversion through Catholic Charities, which is based in Phoenix. And then our goal is to move to other cities like Tempe, Chandler, Scottsdale, and some of our friends on the west side of Phoenix, and kind of have uniform ordinances as well as our buyers going to diversion and then resources for our victims. One of our more recent discussions, though, has been, sometimes our victims are charged with prostitution on a first-time offense, and that is to trigger that diversion, right? Because diversion is run by survivors of sex trafficking, and it is an opportunity to get them resources and case management and help. But as Kate had mentioned earlier, prostitution on your record is a huge barrier and can have lifelong implications. And so we've had some discussions about some lower level misdemeanors, right, that could trigger diversion for our victims. But like, let's say, and I'm not saying this is going to be what it ends up being, but let's say it was like a low level trespass, right, that triggered that diversion for our sex trafficking victims or those who might be in the life. That won't impact them when they apply for a job later or they go to get housing, right? They'll be like, oh, you had a trespass on your record and it was diverted, not, oh, you had a prostitution, right? Because when we hear that word, there's a stigma and there's kind of like a, as a society, we're like, oh, and people don't understand that is actually a victimization and can be a victimization. So we want to reduce those barriers where people might not be able to volunteer at their kids' school, or they'll get put over for housing, or an apartment's like, no, you can't rent with us because of your record, right? So we want to make it as low barrier as possible while still getting victims the resources that they need.
That's great. And Stacey, if you can speak a little bit more, you have so much great resources to share with us and our community. And I'm so grateful for all that you do for the state and all the communities that you're impacting. And I'm looking forward to further community collaboration with you in the months, the years to come. But can you speak a little bit about the CEASE program that you have in place, and your efforts in Scottsdale are really intriguing to me.
Yeah, so it kind of started, we have a hotel and tourism training program. So it's specifically for our hotels and our partners in the tourism industry to recognize and report human trafficking, right? A lot of our hotels and stuff are being used as venues to facilitate trafficking. And now we have civil liability laws. And so we've had some trafficking victims throughout the United States who have been able to civilly sue hotels and win because they never reported victims being trafficked, right? And all the signs were there. So we've been training a lot of hotels, and the city of Scottsdale said, hey, you're training a bunch of hotels in our city. Why don't you train our employees? And so we came up with the CEASE Cities program through our CEASE arm, one of our programs. And so it's cities engaged against sexual exploitation. And when 75% of the city is trained or more, they get a CEASE City designation. So the city of Scottsdale is the first city in the state. And they have, I believe, trained over even 85% of their employees. But, I trained every patrol officer. We worked with their their human trafficking division, and we did like all their detectives. We did the fire department, water department, libraries, literally every employee. We did a lot of in-person, and then we did virtual and on-demand. And now it's in their learning management system. So any new employees that come on will be onboarded. And it's just really great for people to be able to recognize and respond and report human trafficking. And, sometimes they'll see it as their job, but maybe they'll see it in a kiddo that lives on their street or something that's, that seems funny when they're out and about in their daily lives. We also are working with the city of Phoenix to train over 60% of their employees through our task force, which we started before CEASE Cities became a thing. So we might push them for that extra 15% there. But we have had like neighborhood and street and streets is what they call it, who works with transportation. And some of our park and rec employees in the city of Phoenix actually, even on their lunch break, recognize signs of human trafficking at like a restaurant or a gas station or in the parks that they work. And so really, this could touch every facet of our lives, not our work life, but our personal life, maybe someone you go to church with, things like that. And it really does take an entire community not only to recognize it, but to respond to it, because our victims are so victimized, and they deserve all the resources and help. And as Kate mentioned, there's so much trauma bonding and what we call brainwashing, right? And so they need a lot of services, and they need long-term healing, and that healing is not linear, and it depends on the person and how they cope with trauma of how long that healing will be.
Wow, that's incredible. And I love that you're doing that with all those different agencies. I think about like our bus transit system, Mountain Line here in the community. I think about schools. I think about, the county and all the different, city operations and our city staff. It's really incredible to empower people to have that insight. Stacey, for those who are watching, there's a good amount of folks tuning in right now. Are there any basic principles or basic ideas that you can share with this group and those who will watch this video later, just to kind of teach them a thing or two that they can take away from this event?
Yeah. So one of the things I think that is really, you can engage really fast is if you want to go to my website, it's trustaz.org. I've got a great book list on there. If you're really interested in diving down, I've got some suggested reading, books written by survivors, which is really great. So if you buy a book, you're helping a survivor earn income, and you're hearing their story and kind of like in the first person of what they went through. Like, we can describe it, but hearing it from them adds a whole more levity to it. I also suggest a couple documentaries. One of them was with a crew in Arizona. It's our Phoenix Human Trafficking team. It's on PBS, so it's free, Frontline, and it's called Sex Trafficking in America. And it really talks about how they switched their approach and realized, oh my gosh, these are victims, and how they became victim-centered, and what the court process looks like for victims. So it's a great documentary. Another documentary I highly recommend is I Am Jane Doe. I always tell people, we need the community to be engaged. So support Northland, right? Support FIAT. Like if they do a restaurant night, go out there, go to Chipotle, buy dinner so they get some funding. If they're doing a hygiene drive in the winter, pick up an extra bottle of shampoo while you're at the grocery store. A little bit goes a long way, and I know sometimes people feel like they can't give a lot, but even just a thing of toothpaste can make a difference to a victim, especially when they're making backpacks. Tell your city council that this issue matters to you. In fact, they told the city of Mesa last year, all the constituents, and human trafficking was the #2 topic that the city was concerned about there. So, write your legislatures, your congressmen. Like, you don't even have to stay at a local level. Like, say, hey, this issue matters to me, and I want to see resources for victims, and I want to make sure maybe we need to increase laws for traffickers so there's more penalties, right? There's always work to be done, and just because you're just a citizen doesn't mean you can't make a difference.
That's great. Thank you, Stacey. And Dorotha tuning in writes, what a great community engagement program. Thank you, Dorotha. And Bo is tuning in on YouTube and writes, those are great programs. How would I report suspected trafficking? I'm not sure if this is for Kate or for Stacey or both of you.
I'm happy to answer that.
Go ahead, Kate.
Okay, awesome. So we have the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And so for that, you can call that hotline number. It's 24 hours a day. It's 1-888-373-7888. Again, that's 1-888-373-7888. You can also text that number or that line, sorry. And the text line is 233-733. And so you'll get the same response. I always offer the texting option when I'm out doing trainings, especially to folks like medical staff. So when I do trainings at the hospital, I understand that they might not have the time to sit and make a phone call. So send a text to that line and say, here's what I'm seeing. Can you help me with that report? Or does this feel like true indicators of human trafficking? What do you recommend are next steps? And so law enforcement, medical staff, those are all great resources for them. Even teachers, I've texted them. It's very easy to communicate that with them. They're wonderful. You can call it in as a non-emergency to our local FPD non-emergency line. You can also call 911 if it seems like an urgent situation. And to backtrack to the National Human Trafficking Hotline, with those reports, they send those reports to all the local agencies here. So that includes the Flagstaff Police Department, the Coconino Sheriff's Department, the FBI, Homeland Security, and DPS. So they all get it, and then they'll communicate about who's responding to that. If there's a victim or survivor, they can also call those lines or text those lines. They can also call us at Northland Family Help Center. We have a 24-hour crisis line. That number is 928-527-1900. Again, 928-527-1900. And, sometimes people are just wanting to talk about what they've experienced or see, is this real? Is this something I've experienced? And our advocates are trained to talk with them. They can also refer people to myself, and I'm happy to meet with folks about those experiences and connect them to resources. And then just wanted to share on the training piece, our community has been very engaged in training, and we're so excited and hopeful that we'll get CEAS going up here. I will say that NAPTA has participated in training. So you might have seen the bus ads that we're running that were surrounded by human trafficking awareness. They did 2-part trainings with us. That's also in their learning management system. So all of their operators and staff who are now onboarded have human trafficking awareness training. They have an app where you can report concerning behavior. I believe it's called alerts. And so you can report human trafficking there, aggressive riders, or anything that might seem dangerous on the busing system. And then, like I mentioned, working with the hospital, I've worked with law enforcement. In 2019, I did 3 rounds of trainings with them. And of course, due to COVID, those stopped, but we have been in contact about getting those going again. But all of the patrol officers, along with all of our medical staff, have badge cards that are with them. So they have access to questions that they can ask, red flags and indicators of human trafficking, those national numbers and our local numbers. So there is a lot of really wonderful work that's occurring. And like I said, just a community that's really open to addressing this issue. And so we're excited to keep that momentum going and continue that training.
That's great. Stacey, go ahead.
Yeah, I do think it's really important to, especially if we have anybody that's mandatory reporters on the video today, child sex trafficking, we do have to call law enforcement and we do have to make a report. We also have to call DCS and make a report. And so if you are a mandatory reporter, that is, you have to do your due diligence and do that. I like to make sure we call law enforcement and them, so there's a joint investigation done. I will tell you, DCS is our clearinghouse for our traffic kids in the state, and they report those numbers to Congress. But they don't have jurisdiction to investigate a trafficker unless it's a family member in the home that is trafficking that child. And so that would be law enforcement's responsibility. So that's why I always want somebody to do a joint investigation. And then once that person turns 18, it becomes a little more gray and harder. If I get mugged tonight, right, I have a choice to be a victim or not, right, and call PD and file a report. Same with our trafficking victims. Even if we recognize signs of human trafficking in them, if they're an adult, we can't force them to engage in services. We can't, force them to make a police report. And that's why when Kate said, sometimes it takes 7 or 10 contacts with a victim to even get them just to engage in service with us as victim service providers. I don't want anyone to feel like, oh, I recognize this and this victim won't engage. It's normal because of the trauma. And they do have that right to not engage with services or law enforcement. And so that's where it gets a little nuanced and hard for us. And so kind of in our community, we're gardeners, okay? We plant seeds. I may plant a seed with a victim and then Kate might water that, right? And then another victim service might water that seed, and then eventually, this flower will bloom and they will reach out and ask for services. But so we build positive interactions over time and we just keep watering those seeds.
Very good. Anything else on this topic before we take a couple questions? All right, so folks tuning in, we're about to open it up to questions and Q&A. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to put in the chat. I'm going to circle back to Heather's questions that she put in the chat a little bit ago. She's just hoping to get some clarification. So the article from 2018 only mentions the men arrested, but does not give the total number of inquiries during these sting operations from local men. And the follow-up question is, that leaves about 592 men who responded but weren't arrested. How do we know that those men aren't teachers, doctors, coaches? I'm going to add politicians, etc. It is very unnerving to hear numbers like that, and that there were 8 arrests and that the others will remain anonymous.
So,
Kate, Stacey, go ahead.
Since we posted some of those ads, the ads that we post are never for underage. We only post ads, those are who looking to purchase sex with an adult, right? And so a majority of those were looking to purchase sex with an adult. And it was a data collecting ad, right? So I data collect and see where people are calling from, what those zip codes look like, things of that nature. I will tell you, without getting into too much detail, for those that might be engaging with law enforcement, right, and trying to purchase sex with a minor, law enforcement does have to get probable cause in any investigation like that, and there are certain thresholds that they have to meet to actually have charges on that person. And so, yes, somebody might be engaging with law enforcement in an underage chat and looking to purchase sex with a child, but talking to that undercover officer. And so we have obviously I don't get data on that. That's not my realm. But they do have a threshold they have to meet. And just chatting with somebody and saying, hey, I'm interested in buying a kid doesn't necessarily meet the threshold for arrest.
Thank you, Stacey. Anything to add, Kate?
Stacey said it beautifully, but yeah, I will just add, that is absolutely a valid concern, and I appreciate the question and wanting clarity on that. And if you look at that article, there are some very well-known people who were arrested during that, and we know some doctors and things have been arrested in other sting operations around the state, and so that's again why we need to address demand and hold buyers accountable, because they are people in our community who we are engaging with on a daily basis, right? You think about the statistic and about 1 to 20 men, right? We know some of those people who are engaging in that, and we need to hold our friends and family members and peers and coworkers accountable, and talk about not engaging in sex buying and talking about the harms that it has, right? Because there's often this misunderstanding that people who are engaged in commercial sex want to be there and that they like it and that they're doing it for their own free will. And that is very often not the case. And so just providing that education around that, and that there are very real harms, and that often people who are advertised as adults are minors, right? And so people have figured out ways to indicate that folks who are being advertised are minors, even though it might say, they're 23, 24, but they are actually under the age of 18. And so, again, I can't speak enough to holding our peers and family members and those buyers accountable, because they are people that we know and interact with on a daily basis.
Great. Thank you, Kate. Dorothy, thank you for your comment. And Jeff says that he's going to try to connect the dots between your training opportunities, Stacey, and his workplace. Stacey, does he just contact you through Trust to get more information and get in touch, or? Oh, you're muted.
I can link my email if you guys are interested, and you can send me an email and we can get that going. So the CEASE training, all of our training is free, by the way. So we make it very accessible and very easy for the community to engage.
And it's available to businesses, right?
Oh yeah, everybody, anybody that wants it.
That's incredible. So spread the word, folks. Let others know. Let entities know. Let's get trained up and empowered so we can address this as a community, since this is a community issue, and do our best. Folks, other questions? We'll keep going for a couple more minutes here, but we're starting to wrap up. But if anyone has any other questions, now's the time to speak up. And we'll definitely put Stacey's contact in the description of this event as soon as we're off the stream. But if anyone has any other questions, please think of them and add them now. Otherwise, Kate and Stacey, I'll turn it to you to share anything else that you'd like to share. Words of wisdom, resources, anything really that comes to mind that we haven't covered. Now is that time. No pressure.
I would just say for parents, that are on here, kids our youth, our teenagers are especially vulnerable. We all hang out on these devices here, right? Everybody hangs out there. That's where predators, exploiters, traffickers hang out. So just common sense internet safety, right? I did an internet safety presentation last summer for some kids, and I was like, let's Google my name. And I was showing them, and my Instagram popped up, and I was like, oh, I use my name for my Instagram. So I realized that's probably not the safest thing, right? And so we talk about like tagging yourself and having an open profile and not oversharing information and adding people you don't know in real life. So just real general internet safety tips for parents. We have some guides also on our website about how to have these conversations with your kids. Because it's not a one-time conversation. Like, there are people that are actively always looking online to prey on kids for a variety of exploitation crimes. And it's just better to just have some of those conversations with your kids. And so they're less susceptible to being groomed by somebody.
Stacey, that's a great point. And maybe you can just dive into that a little bit deeper. How would a parent go about communicating this with a child? And then how would a child communicate this to a peer?
Yes. So that's actually one of the things we're working on is an internet safety guide for parents. And then I'm going to write one for teens, by teens. And so really just, obviously it depends on the age, but, I always tell my kids, like if you're at the park playing, for instance, like just safety and situational awareness, like no adult needs directions or help finding their lost puppy or things like that, right? I'm like, we all have cell phones. We don't need anything from you. You're 10. And so same goes for people online. I'm like, again, lock down that profile. If you go to a football game, right? Our instinct is to always like, oh my gosh, I'm at the football game, tag myself, geolocate. Wait till you get home to tag yourself. I've had some cases where like some kiddos have added people they didn't know, and they were very freely sharing where they were working and stuff, and the guy stalked her to work, right? So just being very, very cautious and safe. And if someone adds you and they have like 5 mutual friends, they're like, oh no, I go to the other high school across town. Like, do your due diligence and make sure they're really a kid, because we do have predators who will pretend to be kids that go to a different school. So, and just open, honest conversations with your kids. One of my coworkers used to say, I love to talk to my kids in the car because they're trapped, right? They can't leave. So just really talking about, hey, sometimes on the internet, you might be approached by someone who wants personal information or wants to exchange pictures that might be sexual in nature. And like, you don't ever have to send pictures to anybody, like, basic boundary conversations, things like that. And the more, the better.
That's great. Kate, anything else to add to what Stacey just said?
Yeah, I would just love to empower everybody who's attending to reach out to our local elected officials and share your passion for this and why it's important to you and why it's important to get these ordinances going in our community and have the city be a C city, as well as our statewide officials and nationwide officials, right? This doesn't just stop with Flagstaff. We need to do better as not only a city and county, but also as a state and a nation. So it's an election year, and it's time to start reaching out and asking for better ordinances, better protections for victims, as well as better outcomes in holding those buyers accountable. So definitely reach out if it's something you're passionate about and want to see change with. And also, you're welcome to reach out to myself if you're interested in getting involved in FIAT. We also do trainings. Our trainings are also free. And so you're welcome to reach out to me, or if you just have questions or have seen something that feels just a little bit off to you, but maybe you don't quite feel comfortable calling the national hotline yet, give me a call and we can kind of talk through what that report will look like. I'm happy to be a voice and just talk through that with you. So we love it when people are involved and engaged in our community. So just keep up what you're doing.
That's great. Thank you, Kate. And we'll probably end on this last question that came in. Tommy writes, how much effort is put into identifying the traffickers in this process?
I work with a lot of law enforcement across the state. And I will tell you, we don't tolerate traffickers here in Arizona. A lot of people investigate traffickers. We have a lot of specialized detectives too that really solely only go after traffickers. Here in Arizona, we have the highest sentence of a trafficker, a child sex trafficker in the United States at 493 and a half years. So we do not tolerate trafficking here. It's not uncommon for us to get a 100-year sentence in child sex trafficking. And so there is a lot of effort to go after the abusers.
Very good. Awesome. Well, with that, we are out of time. I want to thank you all so much for tuning in. Again, please spread the word about this great discussion that we just had. Share this stream with your networks, and get involved. Reach out to Kate, reach out to Stacey, check out the FIAT website, check out the Trust website, look at the different resources, get your businesses involved, get your schools involved. Let's all get involved. Email your local council and representatives. And together we can address this to the best of our ability and hopefully overcome. But Kate and Stacey, thank you both so much for everything that you and your agencies are doing. And I look forward to the continued partnership that we're building upon over the weeks, months, years to come. So thank you again for taking the time to come on this platform with me and have this discussion with the community. And any last closing words, last call?
I just want to thank everybody who's here very much for taking the time to be engaged in this conversation. It's really important, and we value you being here.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for listening to us, and we appreciate your support. And it's people like you that will help us have an Arizona where no one is bought, sold, or exploited.
I love it. All right, everybody, have a great day. And until next time, thank you all.